You never seen it?
No.
He gets a glass of Flint tap water, and I swear to God, he drinks it like this. Watch this.
Can I get some water? I really didn't need a glass of water. This is not a stunt.
Usually when something isn't a stunt, you have to say
It's
that.
100% a stunt. When was the last time a president stopped a speech to ask, can I get a glass of water? They would never do that. They would have water ready for him.
Does President Trump believe that President Obama should go to jail for something?
Look, the president believes that this matter needs to be thoroughly investigated, and anyone convicted of crime should be held accountable in this country. Go ahead.
What if I told you the man praised as a modern-day hero was actually just a perfectly packaged illusion? Joe Rogan just ripped the mask off Obama's legacy, and what's underneath will shock you. Once admired as the benchmark of modern-day leadership, Barack Obama's legacy has just been forcefully re-examined, this time by the unlikely duo of Joe Rogan and Karoline Leavitt. Their critique didn't chip away at his public image. It obliterated it. Gone is the glossy packaging, replaced by raw scrutiny that sheds light on overlooked missteps and the performative nature of his politics. This wasn't a gentle critique, it was a relentless unmasking, the kind the mainstream media long tiptoed around. As the dust settles, what's left isn't rhetoric or applause, it's the hard, uncomfortable truth, echoing louder than any of Obama's most iconic addresses. For years, Obama was treated as something beyond a political figure. He became a symbol, a cultural phenomenon, a brand. He had a logo, a slogan, a carefully crafted persona that resonated with millions. But behind the soaring speeches and picture-perfect optics, many argue there was a startling lack of substance. His presidency, often described in lyrical terms, was in many ways defined by hesitation, half measures, and the strategic avoidance of political risk. Joe Rogan and Karoline Leavitt weren't the first to question Obama's legacy, but their willingness to do so outside the constraints of establishment media made their analysis all the more piercing. They didn't just look at his policies, they looked at the mythology, the halo, the untouchability that had been granted to him by a media ecosystem more interested in hero worship than journalistic integrity. What they found was a presidency built on branding, not boldness. One that seemed to specialize in optics over outcomes. They pointed to key moments where hope turned hollow, like the red line in Syria that vanished with a shrug, the drone strikes that blurred moral lines, and the surveillance state that expanded under his watch despite campaign promises to dismantle it. The critique wasn't rooted in bitterness, it was rooted in unmet expectations. Obama had promised transformation. What America got, many argue, was preservation of the status quo, of elite interests, of a system that continued to work for the few at the expense of the many. His supporters lauded his restraint. But Rogan and Leavitt asked the harder question: was it restraint, or just reluctance to lead when it mattered most? And while Obama may have inspired millions with his words, words without follow-through are just decoration. The banking crisis, the NSA revelations, the war in Libya, the treatment of whistleblowers, all were cited as examples of a disconnect between rhetoric and reality. The administration's image of compassion and unity often stood in stark contrast to its behind-the-scenes decisions, many of which eroded civil liberties, enabled global instability, and widened domestic divides. Rogan and Leavitt's conversation struck a chord, because it dared to say what many sensed, but were reluctant to admit, that Obama's true legacy may not be one of leadership, but of illusion, a presidency remembered more for how it looked than what it achieved. And now, with the benefit of hindsight and a less enchanted public, the questions surrounding Obama's tenure are no longer whispered, they're spoken out loud, unfiltered, and unafraid.
Rivers said that Michelle Obama was a man before she died. When
was that a joke? I thought it was a joke.
I thought it was a joke too, but the way she said it wasn't like jokey. She was like, oh, come on, everybody knows Michelle Obama's the man. Like, remember that?
Yeah, like, would Big Mike kill you for that?
Well, I think
that President Trump never had anything to do with Russia. And the Russia collusion hoax was a massive fraud perpetuated on the American people from the very beginning. And the worst part of this is Obama knew that truth, and so did all of the other corrupt officials involved in this scam, including former CIA Director John Brennan, former Director of National...
Barack Obama, once seen as a master of optics over action, has once again been pulled into the spotlight, this time under the unforgiving glare of straightforward critique. Joe Rogan and Karoline Leavitt aren't playing by the usual political playbook, and their commentary casts Obama's well-crafted image in a much starker light. Imagine presidential leadership judged like a UFC match. Obama may have been counted out long before his second term kicked off, but buoyed by media adoration and a Nobel Peace Prize awarded more for presence than performance. He drifted through 8 years more like a charismatic illusion than a force of meaningful change.
Over the past few days, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard has unveiled shocking new evidence that former President Barack Obama and top aides in the Obama administration conspired to subvert President Trump's 2016 election victory and undermine the democratic will of the American people.
If you're enjoying this breakdown, don't forget to subscribe and tap that bell icon because we're just getting started. Joe Rogan didn't have to dig too far to uncover the truth. Obama's presidency. It plays more like an overproduced Netflix special, big budget, big promises, but little payoff. The hype was real, the delivery, not so much. For those who mistook branding for progress. A new slogan or font was enough to feel like change had arrived. Remember when he promised to be the most transparent president in history? In hindsight, duct tape has probably revealed more. From the Fast and Furious scandal to mass surveillance revelations, his yes, we can quickly morphed into no. We won't, especially when it comes to Biden. Now fast forward to that bizarre moment where Obama half-joked about staying in power through a puppet presidency, someone wearing the suit while he whispered lines from the basement. Creepy, maybe. Far-fetched, not really, considering what we know now. Turns out, he may have signed less with conviction and more with an Autodash pen. Karoline Leavitt, with her sharp Gen Z lens, didn't need years of puff pieces to call out the contradictions. While legacy media was still swooning over his perfectly pressed suits and cinematic strolls across the lawn, she was already exposing what many missed, a presidency built on performance. Under Obama, America looked great on the outside, like an Instagram influencer polished with filters, but underneath, there wasn't much substance holding it together.
Continue while this case is being appealed?
We don't have any flights planned specifically, but we will continue with the mass deportations. And I would just like to point out that the judge in this case is essentially trying to say that the president doesn't have the executive authority to deport foreign terrorists from our American soil. That is an egregious abuse of the bench. This judge does not have that authority. It is the opinion of this White House and of this administration, and that's why we're fighting this in court. And it's very, very clear that this is an activist judge who is trying to usurp the president's authority. Under the Alien Enemies Act, the president has this power, and that's why this deportation campaign has continued. And this judge, Judge Boasberg, is a Democrat activist. He was appointed by Barack Obama. His wife has donated more than $10,000 to Democrats, and he has consistently shown his disdain for this president and his policies.
Let's not romanticize Obama's economic track record. He stepped into office during a crisis, sure, but after 8 years, the economy didn't exactly sprint out of that hole. It limped. He spent most of his first term blaming George Bush, and the rest claiming credit for every minimum wage job a drive-through window could offer. The recovery was so sluggish it could have used a cane and a translator. The only real growth during his presidency, the national detand may be Joe Biden's highlight reel of baffling soundbites. Rogan nailed a fundamental truth. Most politicians promised the moon during campaigns, only to deliver reruns once they're in office. Obama was no exception. The whole hope and change slogan. Even his campaign website had to quietly delete promises, especially those about protecting whistleblowers. Despite his speeches, his administration became one of the harshest on people who dared to speak out. Ask Edward Snowden, who Obama dismissed not as a patriot, but as a problem, all while claiming he would have reformed surveillance eventually. Maybe, if no one leaked anything first. On the global stage, Obama had a gift for dressing up disaster in eloquence. He could describe a crisis like he was narrating a National Geographic special without ever fixing it. He launched drone strikes with the ease of clicking play, then won accolades for narrating documentaries. Under his foreign policy, Libya burned, Syria unraveled, and that infamous red line, in the sand, more like a fading blush on a cocktail napkin. Meanwhile, drones under Obama flew more missions than some commercial airlines. Publicly, he gave speeches about diplomacy. Privately, the sky was buzzing with deadly precision. Civilian casualties, wedding parties were shrugged off with chilling normalcy, while the press gave him the benefit of every doubt. And then, there was the subtle yet corrosive way race was wielded as a political tool. National tragedies became sermon podiums. Emotional moments turned into campaign talking points. The country didn't just grow divided, was trained to be, and Obama, ever charismatic, smiled through it all, like he'd just solved world peace, with a playlist on shuffle. All of this unpacked in real time on the Joe Rogan Experience.
Fun because things are actually happening. Very different than most of the time when people get elected.
And I will shut down the federal Department of Education, and we will move everything back to the state.
Most of the time when people get elected, they claim all these things when they're running for president. Then they get into office and not much changes.
Individualize education and do it with the love for their children.
And in fact, a lot of what they campaigned on.
During Obama's tenure, the IRS didn't just crunch numbers, it picked targets. Conservative groups, especially those tied to the Tea Party, were treated with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for hostile actors, while actual foreign threats were often brushed off like awkward guests at a dinner party. Benghazi. That turned into a haunted chapter of bureaucracy. With Hillary Clinton playing lead in the mystery, and Obama acting like the whole thing was just a poorly rated YouTube video. Accountability under his administration was about as easy to find as a coherent Biden quote. Joe Rogan didn't hold back, his takedown was surgical. Driven by years of pent-up questions the mainstream press never dared to ask, and then there was Obamacare. Its rollout was so chaotic, it felt like a high school computer club on dial. Could have pulled it off better. Grand promises like keep your doctor floated around like party confetti, only to vanish when reality hit. The website. It crashed harder than a conspiracy theory on Hunter Biden's laptop through it all. The media acted less like a watchdog and more like a fan club. Obama could sneeze in the direction of a puppy, and CNN would call it historic. His Spotify playlists made headlines. His basketball games were treated like geopolitical analysis. Meanwhile, real reporters were being surveilled, and whistleblowers were hunted down like villains in a dystopian sequel. It was a masterclass in optics, glossy on the outside, deeply flawed underneath.
I'm sorry, did you take any comfort from knowing that Obama, when he was running for office and in his Hope and Change website, he had provisions to protect whistleblowers and provisions to to reward people? Right? I mean, do you remember all that? I mean, it was eventually redacted, or he eventually deleted it from the website.
Yeah, but that disappeared it from the website.
Yes, but that was a big part of his program, or what he was running on, was that when people were exposing unlawful activity, he was going to protect those people. Did you take any comfort
Obama
in that?
also campaigned. Well, Obama also, during his campaign, said he campaigned actively against the warrantless wiretapping the Bush.
Karoline Leavitt didn't just question Obama's legacy, she dismantled the mythology around it. What surrounded him wasn't leadership, it was brand management. Obama became less of a president and more of a lifestyle label, complete with logos, merchandise, and a fandom that demanded loyalty, not logic. It wasn't about policy, it was about vibes. His speeches, all honeyed cadence and poetic ambiguity, like Shakespeare wrapped in silk, offering comfort while delivering little. As working-class Americans battled job losses and cultural dislocation, Obama was busy rubbing elbows with celebrities and soaking up applause. The White House turned into a pop culture showroom, where late-night cameos and curated Spotify playlists took precedence over substance. Too many. He looked like a savior. In practice, he drifted more like a well-dressed ghost through the machinery of government, present in form, absent in impact. The media, enchanted, they swooned at his every head tilt, dissected his playlists like sacred texts, and covered his basketball shots like military victories. Meanwhile, real journalists were being surveilled, and whistleblowers, those he once promised to protect, were pursued like fugitives. Even his campaign site's pro-whistleblower policies quietly disappeared, much like the accountability he once championed, and the contradictions kept piling up. Under Obama, big tech didn't just rise, it thrived. Google and Facebook weren't just influencers, they were practically cabinet members. The very administration that failed to build a functioning healthcare website managed to lay the groundwork for surveillance capitalism, gift-wrapped in PR and political charm. Leavitt pulled back the curtain. The executive orders flew like candy from a parade float. If Congress didn't cooperate, he acted anyway, lawful or not. His allies got richer. Wall Street rebounded while regular Americans were lectured about sacrifice. Banks were bailed out. Homeowners were left to fend for themselves. And then he had the audacity to scold the public about personal responsibility. It was like being robbed and told to be grateful. The thief didn't break the door on the way out. And then there was the duplicity. The man who once promised to close Guantanamo Bay left it open. The candidate who railed against Bush-era surveillance expanded it. The president who promised unity often presided over division, polishing speeches about togetherness while social fault lines deepened. Karoline didn't miss the symbolism over substance nature of it all. Obama's presidency, in retrospect, wasn't transformative, was performative. And the performance didn't end when he left office. The third term whispers. They didn't come out of nowhere. From policies to personnel, the Biden administration feels more like a polished sequel to the Obama years than a distinct chapter. Rogan called it what it was, an Obama rerun, with fewer sparkles and more breakdowns. Even post-presidency, the stagecraft continued. Netflix deals, best-selling books, podcast appearances. Obama's second act was less about public service and more about self-branding in high definition. While inflation soared and cultural divisions spiraled into chaos, he was posting drone shots from Martha's Vineyard. The man who once warned about rising sea levels now owns oceanfront property that would make Gatsby jealous. Climate panic, for the public, beachfront serenity for him. And all the while, he quietly worked behind the scenes, while publicly smiling through the peaceful transfer of power. Privately, he played a much darker game, sowing distrust, undermining his successor, and fueling division that still echoes today. Joe Rogan didn't exaggerate. He didn't need to. Obama wasn't a revolutionary, he was a carefully managed illusion, a figurehead for elite interests, draped in charisma and protected by press adoration. The presidency under him didn't drain the swamp. It rebranded it and taught it how to pose for selfies. Newly released evidence from the Director of National Intelligence who stood alongside this revelation confirmed what many long suspected. The Obama administration didn't just bend intelligence to political ends, it manufactured it. Weaponized narratives were crafted, spun, and deployed like tools of a carefully planned PR campaign. And yet, amid the smoke and mirrors, the real fractures in America were left to deepen. Racial tensions intensified. Political tribalism hit a fever pitch. Social trust unraveled. But each time the nation reached a boiling point, Obama's response was all style. No substance, a neatly worded tweet, a hashtag, a symbolic gesture, followed by a quiet retreat into the background. Joe Rogan didn't hold back. He painted Obama not as a leader, but as a narrator, someone who observed crisis from a safe distance, framed it with elegance, and exited stage left before any real decisions had to be made. His presidency became a lesson in the aesthetics of power. How to appear engaged without ever getting your hands dirty. For everyday Americans, the Obama years meant stagnant wages, shrinking liberties, and a creeping sense of economic and cultural dislocation. While the top earners watched their portfolios soar, much of the working and middle class struggled with underemployment, rising healthcare costs, and an economy that never quite recovered for them. The so-called recovery often felt like a mirage reflected in charts and headlines, but not in paychecks, grocery bills, or job security. At the same time, Obama collected standing ovations from Hollywood fundraisers, international forums, and Ivy League auditoriums. His smooth delivery and charismatic presence more celebrated than any tangible policy breakthrough. To the elite media class and the coastal commentariat, he was the ultimate symbol of sophistication, articulate, measured, and cosmopolitan. But admiration doesn't equal results, and while they clapped, large swaths of America quietly drifted further into disillusionment. Yet even now, the Democratic Party clings to his legacy like a childhood security blanket. They replay his greatest hits, those iconic moments, that perfect phrasing, that familiar rhythm of hope and change, as if invoking the past could distract from the dysfunction of the present. It's a strange kind of political nostalgia, one that glosses over the realities of his tenure in favor of emotional comfort. Obama has become both shield and shrine, used to deflect criticism and sanctify a party increasingly out of touch with its base. Beneath the soaring rhetoric, however, was always inertia. For all the promises of transformation, there was a persistent unwillingness to confront the entrenched systems that sustained inequality and centralized power. The banks got bigger. The surveillance state grew bolder. Foreign conflicts dragged on. Partisan divides deepened. And through it all, the slogans kept coming: beautiful, quotable, and ultimately hollow. Obama didn't challenge the system. He narrated it. He didn't drain the swamp. He gave it a TED Talk. His real talent wasn't change, it was presentation. He sold the illusion of progress while preserving the machinery of stagnation. And in the end, that may be his lasting legacy. A masterclass in turning inaction into an art form, and branding it as hope.